It was a quiet, sunlit afternoon at the public market. Stalls lined the streets with colorful fruits, handmade crafts, and the scent of fresh bread drifting through the air. Children laughed as they chased each other past flower stands, and street musicians played soft melodies that seemed to float above the crowd. Tourists stopped to snap pictures, couples strolled hand in hand, and everything seemed perfectly ordinary. In the middle of this calm scene walked an older man. He moved slowly, almost deliberately, weaving past shoppers without disturbing anyone. His eyes were sharp, his expression calm, but there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, an aura that made you instinctively sense he wasn't someone to be underestimated. People didn't notice him at first. He blended into the crowd like any other passerby, but not everyone was oblivious. At the far end of the market, a cocky young Taekwondo fighter strutted through the crowd, showing off, flexing his arms, and radiating confidence. He laughed loudly, kicking at the empty space beside him, daring the world to notice him. And when his eyes landed on the older man, something sparked, a mix of challenge, arrogance, and curiosity. He could feel that this man was different. That calm presence, that unshakable stillness, it irritated him. No one knew it yet, but the market was about to witness a moment no one would forget. A collision of confidence and experience was about to happen. The peaceful afternoon, with its music, laughter, and gentle sun, was seconds away from being shattered, because one man was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Where are you watching from? And have you ever seen someone stay completely calm under pressure? Comment below. The peaceful rhythm of the market was suddenly interrupted. The older man moved carefully through a narrow aisle between a fruit stall and a spice vendor, carrying a small basket. His eyes scanned the crowd politely, and his steps were measured, almost like he was aware of every person around him. He had no rush, no arrogance, only a quiet presence that seemed to demand nothing but respect. Then it happened. A tall, muscular young man, clearly skilled in Taekwondo, the kind of fighter who exuded confidence even in casual movement, was striding through the same aisle. His boots clacked loudly on the stone floor, and his eyes scanned the market for attention. He didn't see the older man until the very last moment, but instead of slowing down, he collided aggressively. "Watch where you're going, old man," the young fighter barked, his voice cutting through the laughter and music like a knife. His tone wasn't an apology or even irritation, it was a challenge. Every eye nearby turned toward them. Some shoppers stepped back instinctively, sensing trouble before it fully arrived. The older man's reaction was almost imperceptible. He didn't flinch, he didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the fighter and said calmly, "I'm sorry. It was an accident." His tone was soft, controlled, almost unnervingly polite. The contrast between the man's calm demeanor and the fighter's aggression made the young man bristle further. The crowd felt it. A few onlookers whispered to each other. Phones came out. Something about the older man's presence made people stop in their tracks. He wasn't just calm, he was in complete control of himself, almost like he knew exactly what would happen next. But the young fighter didn't notice. He wasn't looking for peace. He wanted dominance, attention, to prove himself. He squared his shoulders, stared the older man down, and spat on the ground near him, a deliberate act meant to humiliate. The market fell into a tense silence. People froze mid-step, unsure whether to intervene. Street musicians stopped playing for a heartbeat. Even the children seemed to sense the rising tension. The older man didn't react to the spit. He didn't shout. He didn't make a threatening move. Instead, he simply adjusted his stance slightly, his eyes never leaving the young fighters. There was a moment, a heartbeat, where the air itself seemed heavier, charged with anticipation. Then, almost as if testing the waters, the young fighter leaned in and sneered, "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." The older man tilted his head slightly, a faint smile forming at the corner of his mouth. He didn't answer with words. His silence spoke louder than any insult ever could. Before we move on, a quick question for you watching. Have you ever stayed calm when someone disrespected you? Comment below if you think patience is stronger than aggression. And for a moment, just imagine the calm before the storm, because this is exactly how one mistake begins. The market seemed to hold its breath. Every person nearby sensed something was about to happen, though no one could predict the intensity that was about to erupt. The older man stood quietly, his basket still in hand, unshaken by the aggression. His calmness seemed almost unnatural, like a still lake in the middle of a storm. The young Taekwondo fighter, on the other hand, was the very embodiment of arrogance. Muscles tensed, eyes flashing with defiance, he took a step closer. His voice was louder this time, deliberately meant to draw attention. "Do you even know who I am?" He spat, leaning in, a smirk playing on his lips. "I could crush you without even trying." The words hung in the air, but the older man didn't flinch. He didn't even lift a finger. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, observing the fighter with the kind of quiet confidence that unsettled anyone who confronted him. It was a look that said, "I see everything. I understand everything, and your aggression means nothing to me." People around them began to notice. Shoppers slowed their pace, vendors peeked from behind counters, and a few brave souls began to record the scene on their phones. Something about the older man's composure was magnetic, almost hypnotic. He wasn't scared, he wasn't angry, yet every movement of his body radiated quiet power. The young fighter's frustration grew. His voice rose even higher, full of contempt. "You think calmness makes you better than me?" he shouted. "You're just an old man hiding behind a fake sense of strength." But the older man remained utterly composed. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, calm yet unnervingly confident. The smile seemed to say, "Keep testing me. Keep showing who you really are." The crowd started murmuring, whispers traveling through the market like wildfire. "Who is he?" some asked. "Why isn't he reacting?" Others shook their heads, sensing that the older man was not ordinary. Phones clicked and recorded. People leaned out of shop windows, trying to get a better look. The fighter, seeing the attention he was drawing, decided to escalate further. He started circling the older man like a predator. He shouted insults about age, weakness, and respect. He called him a coward, a relic of the past, daring him to fight back. Every insult was designed to provoke, to humiliate, to dominate. But the older man didn't bite. Instead, he simply shifted his weight slightly, eyes calm, almost pitying. There was a subtle grace in the way he moved, a rhythm that suggested a lifetime of experience and mastery. For a fleeting second, even the fighter seemed thrown off. He caught a glimpse of something in those eyes, something he couldn't define. The crowd could feel it too. There was a tension in the air that made people instinctively step back. It was the kind of tension that makes your stomach knot, your heartbeat quicken, and your senses sharpen. People watched, mesmerized, as the older man remained unmoved, even as the fighter's aggression grew louder and more threatening. Then came the first public gasp. The fighter leaned closer, shouting one last insult.
"You're weak. You can't stop me."
It was in that moment that something shifted. The older man's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, not in anger, but in warning. A subtle movement of his hand, just enough to signal you're playing with fire. The fighter, oblivious, laughed. "Ha! I could end this in seconds!" But in the crowd, whispers spread. There's something different about him. Calm yet commanding. He's not like anyone I've seen before. Phones recorded every second, capturing the growing tension and the inexplicable stillness of the older man. And then, without any further warning, the fighter made a critical mistake. He crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, a line that, in hindsight, everyone watching would recognize as the moment disaster became inevitable. The older man said nothing. He made no sudden moves. Yet in that silence, in that composure, it was already clear that the market was about to witness a lesson that no one would forget. Then the bully crossed a line he could never uncross. The market, once filled with laughter, music, and casual chatter, had transformed into a theater of tension. Every passerby sensed that something monumental was about to unfold, though no one could predict exactly how intense it would become. The young Taekwondo fighter, fueled by arrogance and adrenaline, stepped closer to the older man. His chest heaved with aggression, his fists clenched tightly, and his eyes burned with a mix of contempt and impatience. "You think I won't take you down?" he shouted, voice echoing through the narrow streets. "You think calmness makes you strong? I'll show you real strength." The older man remained perfectly composed. His calm gaze never wavered, his body unmoving yet alert, like a coiled spring. Every person watching could feel the tension radiating from him. There was an aura of control that unsettled even the bravest onlookers. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a threatening move. He simply stood there, a portrait of measured patience. But the fighter wasn't interested in subtlety. His pride and need for dominance overwhelmed any restraint. He stepped forward and delivered the first overt act of public humiliation. A sharp slap across the older man's face echoed like a gunshot. Time seemed to freeze. The sound rang out louder than any yell or shout could have. People gasped, their hearts skipping beats. Shoppers froze mid-step, fruit baskets wobbled precariously on the stalls, and a child's ice cream cone fell to the ground unnoticed. Even the street musicians stopped playing, their instruments hanging silent in midair. The market was silent. Every eye turned toward the scene. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The older man's head tilted slightly from the force, but his expression didn't change in anger or fear. His eyes, still calm and unbroken, locked onto the fighter. There was no flinch, no retaliation, no visible sign of pain. The silence itself spoke volumes, an invisible warning that the consequences of this act were far greater than anyone could imagine. The young fighter, expecting either fear or a defensive reaction, laughed nervously. Ha! Too slow. You're just an old man, pathetic. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the first hints of doubt. But then something subtle happened. The older man's gaze intensified. A faint shift in his posture, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, suggested readiness, awareness, and a controlled power that could unleash in an instant. The crowd could feel it, though they didn't yet understand what it meant. Something was coming, something inevitable. The people around them instinctively stepped back. Vendors drew in their carts. A few brave shoppers whispered, "Don't do it, he's not ordinary." Phones recorded every second, capturing the moment that would go viral long before it even happened. The fighter, emboldened by the seeming stillness, leaned in closer.
You don't scare me,
He shouted, "Spittle flying! I could end this right now." Still, the older man didn't flinch. His silence was louder than any scream, more intimidating than any threat. He simply adjusted his stance slightly, a deliberate, measured movement that suggested both patience and imminent action. For a heartbeat, the market seemed suspended in a parallel reality. Every person present felt the electric tension, an unspoken warning that the next moment would define everything. And then, slowly, the older man spoke. Not in anger, not in threat, but in a calm, deliberate tone that cut through the charged silence. "I tried to stop you not for me, but for you?" The words were simple, but their weight was immeasurable. The fighter, already tense, laughed nervously again, attempting to dismiss the calm warning. But inside, doubt began to creep in. Something about this man, his unshakable demeanor, the precision in his movements, the authority in his silence, was not what he had anticipated. The market remained frozen. The slap had crossed a line, and now everyone felt it. No one spoke, no one moved, and yet the air vibrated with anticipation. Something monumental was about to happen, and every person present could sense it in their bones. The market remained frozen, the echoes of the slap still vibrating in the air. Every eye was fixed on the older man, every heartbeat synchronized with the tension in his calm posture. But he didn't move, he didn't shout. He didn't lash out. Instead, he took a single deep breath, almost imperceptibly. And his gaze met the young fighters with a quiet intensity that sent a shiver down the spines of everyone watching. "He's not just calm," a vendor whispered to a nearby customer. "There's something else, something dangerous." The young Taekwondo fighter, who had entered the market brimming with arrogance and pride, now felt a crack in his confidence. The older man's stillness was unsettling, almost unnatural. He had expected fear, hesitation, or submission, but this calmness was something he didn't understand. It made him anxious in a way that words couldn't describe. The older man spoke, his voice soft but deliberate. "I tried to stop you not for me, but for you." The words hung in the air, carrying more weight than the loudest insult. The fighter laughed nervously, trying to mask the unease creeping into his chest.
Stop me from me.
"You're just an old man?" He sneered, though the edge in his voice betrayed the first flickers of doubt. Around them, the crowd leaned closer, phones raised, recording every moment. People exchanged anxious glances, sensing the invisible tension that had gripped the market. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath, everyone instinctively aware that the calm man before them was not ordinary. The older man shifted slightly, just enough to reveal a subtle readiness in his stance. Not aggression, not threat, but preparedness, a silent warning that the next move would not be ordinary. Every muscle in his body seemed relaxed, yet controlled, as if he could react with deadly precision in a single heartbeat. The fighter, sensing the crowd's gaze and the shifting energy, tried to regain his composure. He took a step closer, fists clenched. "You think you're some kind of hero? Some kind of secret warrior? I don't care! I can take you!" But the older man didn't respond with aggression. Instead, his calmness became heavier, almost suffocating in its intensity. He didn't need to strike. He didn't need to shout. His presence alone was a warning. Then came a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A few people in the crowd whispered, "He's not alone." It was a feeling, a whisper in the air, that something greater was on its way. The older man's eyes flicked briefly to a distant street, just enough for those paying attention to notice. There was power behind his calm gaze, a signal that consequences were imminent. The fighter laughed again, this time a little too loudly, trying to cover his anxiety. "I don't see anyone else!" he shouted. "I'm not afraid of you." The older man smiled faintly, almost pitying, and said quietly, "The real danger isn't standing in front of you." The words were cryptic, but the crowd understood instinctively that something was coming. Vendors began subtly moving back behind their stalls, shoppers edged toward safer spots, and even the children froze mid-step, The energy in the market shifted from curiosity to awe to nervous anticipation. Every person watching could feel the impending moment, the calm before the storm. The older man didn't need to strike, didn't need to act, and yet the tension was already unbearable. It was the kind of moment that made your heart race, your palms sweat, and your mind scream, something big is about to happen. The young fighter, growing impatient and still unaware of the looming threat, squared his shoulders and shouted again. But his bravado was cracking, and a flicker of doubt had entered his eyes. For the first time, he realized that he might have underestimated the older man, and the older man, still calm, still unshaken, simply waited, not with malice, not with fear, but with the quiet assurance of someone who knew the outcome long before anyone else did. Because the real danger wasn't standing in front of him. Who do you think is coming to intervene? Comment below with your guess. What would you do if you were there? The tension in the market had reached a fever pitch. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in the stillness. The young Taekwondo fighter, chest rising and falling rapidly, still clung to his arrogance, but a seed of unease had begun to sprout. Something about the older man, his calm, his composure, his subtle warnings, made it clear that the stakes were far higher than he could ever anticipate. Then, almost without warning, a deep, authoritative rumble rolled down the street. Black SUVs appeared, cutting through the crowd like shadows. Their tires screeched against the cobblestones as federal agents stepped out, moving with precision and confidence. The crowd gasped, instinctively stepping back, creating a wide circle around the older man and the fighter. The older man's gaze shifted slightly, just a fraction, acknowledging the arrival of reinforcements. He remained calm, almost serene, but there was now an unmistakable authority in the way he carried himself. The fighter's bravado wavered. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of panic. He looked around, searching for support, but there was none. The market, once a playground for his arrogance, had become a stage for consequences he could never control. Agents moved efficiently, securing the perimeter, their eyes sharp and unyielding. Cameras and phones were still raised, recording every second, capturing the drama for anyone watching. The atmosphere was electric. Anticipation hung like a tangible force in the air. Then, through the crowd of agents and civilians, a young man stepped forward. His posture was confident, but his eyes held concern. The fighter's confusion deepened as he saw him approach the older man. "Dad, are you okay?" The young man said softly, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. The older man's calm demeanor never broke. He smiled faintly, nodding, his eyes still fixed on the fighter who had underestimated him so completely. The fighter's jaw dropped. His mind raced. "Chief of Homeland Security, Dad." The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. Every insult, every act of aggression, every challenge he had thrown at this man was against someone far more powerful and influential than he could have imagined. The agents moved closer, flanking the older man. One of them, a tall man with a commanding presence, leaned down and said quietly to the fighter, "Sir, you need to step back before things get worse." The fighter froze, his earlier confidence shattered. He tried to mask his fear with bluster, but it was too late. The market had witnessed the unraveling of his arrogance in real time. Phones continued to record, capturing his humiliation, while whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Then came the defining moment. The older man looked at the fighter, calm but with a glimmer of warning in his eyes, and spoke. "I tried to stop you before it got to this point. Now you've seen the consequences of your actions." The words were calm, almost gentle, but carried the weight of absolute authority. The fighter finally understood that the calm man he had mocked was far from ordinary. The market had become a living lesson in respect, patience, and the danger of arrogance. People in the crowd whispered, some still in shock, "This isn't just a fight, this is someone untouchable. Someone above all of us." Phones recorded every second. Clips of this moment would soon go viral, not just for the slap or the intimidation, but for the shocking reveal. The older man was not only calm under pressure, he was connected, powerful, untouchable. The young fighter's humiliation was complete. His bravado was gone. He had crossed a line that he could never uncross, and now he faced consequences far beyond anything he could handle alone. The market spectators, from shoppers to vendors, finally exhaled, realizing the danger had passed. But the lesson was permanent. That's when the bully realized who he had slapped. If you were in the market, would you have backed down or confronted him? Comment back down or stand up below. The market slowly exhaled. The tension that had gripped every corner, every heartbeat, began to fade. The crowd remained frozen in awe, still whispering and recording, their eyes darting between the older man and his son, who had just revealed his identity. People had come expecting drama, maybe even a fight. But what unfolded was far beyond anything they could imagine. The young Taekwondo fighter stood trembling, still trying to process the magnitude of his mistake. His chest heaved, sweat streaked his brow. The arrogance, confidence, and bravado he had carried just moments ago had evaporated completely. The slap, meant to assert dominance, now seemed like a moment of irreversible folly. The older man, calm as ever, looked at him not with anger, not with vindictiveness, but with quiet authority. "You made a mistake," the older man said softly, voice steady, almost fatherly. "A mistake anyone could make. But respect is not something you take by force. It is not something you demand with aggression. Respect is earned, and it is owed to everyone simply because they are human." The fighter opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, but words faltered. He had no clever retort, no excuse, no justification for what he had done. The older man's words and presence had stripped him bare, leaving only the stark reality of his arrogance and impulsiveness. Around them, the crowd began to murmur in agreement, nodding at the wisdom spoken aloud. Some began to clap softly, others simply watched in awe. Phones continued to record, capturing not just the slap, but the lesson behind it, the power of calmness, patience, and moral authority. The older man's son, still standing close by, placed a reassuring hand on his father's shoulder. "He's okay," he said quietly. "You handled it perfectly." Their bond was evident, a quiet strength that underscored the lesson power is not only in force, but in restraint, in awareness, and in the protection of others. The Taekwondo fighter, now fully aware of the consequences, lowered his gaze. The market's lesson was complete. No one had needed a fight to enforce justice, only presence, wisdom, and unwavering composure. The older man turned to the crowd, voice soft but carrying through the marquee. "I did not seek revenge. I did not strike back. My goal was simple: to show that respect is universal. It is not granted based on age, strength, or power. It is owed to every person because every person matters." A silence followed. Then a ripple of applause began to spread. Some cheered, some clapped, some simply shook their heads in wonder. The lesson had landed. Humility, patience, and moral authority are stronger than aggression or arrogance. The fighter, finally understanding, whispered an apology, not loud, not showy, but genuine. The older man nodded slightly, accepting it without fanfare. There was no humiliation beyond the natural consequences of arrogance, no public shaming beyond the reality that truth had spoken for itself. The older man, still calm, picked up his basket, began walking slowly through the market, and said to no one in particular, "Remember, this power without control is meaningless. Strength without patience is dangerous. And respect should never depend on who someone is. It should be given because they are human. If you believe respect should be given to everyone, comment #RESPECT below. Share this video to remind someone that patience and moral courage are the real strength." The crowd began to disperse, the market returning slowly to its everyday rhythm. The music resumed, laughter returned, and life continued, but the lesson lingered. Every person there had witnessed more than a confrontation. They had seen the power of calm, the strength of patience, and the impact of human dignity. Even the fighter would never forget, and neither would the thousands who would see this video online. The market had become a living testament to one truth. In a world that often rewards aggression, calmness and respect are the greatest power of all.